How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tear Talk. So, guys, I want to do one more video on the Amory Jones case because I read the comments and I notice that there's a lot of focus on accountability and if the children can't be held accountable because of their age. So, again, you have a 10-year-old, a 9-year-old, and an 8-year-old suspect. 8-year-old has not been charged, but the 10 and 9-year-old have. What about the parents? And I did discuss that briefly in, I think, the last video I did, because we try to define what justice means, because justice sometimes could be very subjective, and we do need a true meaning that is anchored by the victim and her family. Justice is relevant to what they would require, what they need. The victim, to me, always has priority. Now, with that said, I took some of the comments and concerns that you had, and I gave it to a good friend of mine, Eric, and I'm sure we'll be seeing him in the comments when we post this up. It's not a person that goes on screen, but he was willing to answer the questions. He has a good, strong familiarity with the juvenile justice system. He was nice enough to answer some detailed questions that came from your comments that I thought were relevant in this dialogue. I was able to put what he contributed into what I was also able to put together, and hopefully you guys learned something from the material, because I'm actually learning along the way as well. So this is interesting. It's great to be able to take this journey together. My friend Eric has been following this case. He's very interested in this case, as anybody would be in regards to juvenile justice. The only concern I can't answer yet is there's another concern that's coming up in my comments about the family of where Amory was dropped off and their responsibility, because they're pushing that they lost, the child got lost under their care. I'm not going to touch on that yet because I don't know the specifics of that. And also, I'm very careful when it comes to shifting blame, because at the end of the day, I don't know so much about what happened with that, but I want to stay focused on where we need to be, because sometimes we get so caught up and distracted in areas that it could be relevant. I get it. But right now, we don't know. So let's stay focused on where we have the most valid information. So again, I want to thank Eric for helping me put something together here. And I would like to share with you guys just to answer some of your questions. So again, we're going back to justice for Amory. Who should pay for Amory's pain? When parents must be held accountable. I'm going to try to continue carrying out the message that needs to be carried out for this, as long as the questions keep on coming in. Are some older cases that I cover that I still keep relevant as updates come, but I think I'm going to kind of step away from things that are new until I can make sure we answer all the comments that are coming through my YouTube channel. And guys, feel free, ask me any questions that you may have, or give me information that you feel is relevant. That's even more important. And my email is ganjianthony@yahoo.com, ganjianthony@yahoo.com. And if there's a case, as my audience grows, provide a case to me that you think may need some attention. And, what angles do you feel need to be addressed? And I do have some experts that can help me out. And then eventually, as the audience grows, it will enable me to get more known experts in certain fields. It will widen my resources. So when children commit horrors, the Amory Jones case and limits of justice. So on September 13, 2025, 5-year-old Cleveland girl known as Amory Jones. So this is her right here. Beautiful little girl. We should all know this beautiful face by now. So again, Amory Jones was found brutally beaten and left unrecognizable in a nearby field on September 13th. The Cuyahoga County Prosecutor Office announced that 3 children, ages 8, 9, and 10, are facing charges for the attack. Amory's mother, Ontavia Kennebrew, described the scene. Her hair was scalped from her head. She had bruises and blood all over her body. Her lips and mouth were filled with blood. And according to Kennebrew, the suspects beat Amory until she was knocked unconscious, tried to strangle her with a shirt, and even urinated on her during the assault. And by the way, she was also sexually assaulted. Now, awake and recovering, the child is not the same as before, Kennebrew says, and the mother agonizes that not finding justice makes me feel like I failed her. That's powerful. But which parent wouldn't feel that way. Our job is to protect our children. And when something like this happens, it's truly devastating, especially because children need our protection. They need the protection not just of the family, you need the protection of the community, the protection of this community, any area where protection can be provided, need to protect our children, including the legal system. And that's part of the debate now. And guys, if you check out the video I did yesterday, we talk about where the legal system needs to step in. We kind of define justice as prevention, rehabilitation, but also healing. And with that comes accountability. How can we achieve justice for a crime so horrific when the alleged perpetrators are barely older than the victim? Amory's case has shocked the public, not just for its cruelty, but for the legal and moral dilemma it poses. What does justice mean when the accused are children? And again, we touched on that a bit yesterday, but kind of may touch on to this a little bit today as we start putting a greater perspective on the parents. So before we can address justice, we must confront an uncomfortable truth. And guys, everything I say is not to minimize, but we have to put it out there because we know if there's arguments to a perspective that we may have to challenge those arguments from the perspective that's provided from the other side. This way, the arguments grow as opposed to one side being resistant and the other side just not being understood. So we gotta take into account that the brains of an 8, 9, and 10-year-olds are fundamentally different from adult brains. Neuroscience's research shows that the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for impulse control, moral reasoning, understanding consequences, and regulating emotions, is not fully developed until the mid-20s. Now, guys, I had a dialogue with a mental health clinician, Denise Schoenwald, a few episodes back. We break into all this, and that dialogue was long, but there was a lot to discuss, a lot of nuance we were learning along the way. But it puts the key is to put the dialogue out there so people know that it's being touched on. So it's not that we don't know these concerns exist. Of course we know these concerns exist. Sometimes it's not even about having the answer, but knowing the right questions that need to be asked. So again, for children this young, you have impulse control is minimal, so they struggle to pause between thought and action. Future consequences feel abstract. The idea that this will hurt someone badly or I could go to jail lacks emotional weight because they have what they call pre-conventional moral judgment. So basically, when they judge a concern or judge something that they're doing, they don't really focus so much on long-term consequences, really, or they don't focus so much on anything that would be empathetic, how the person I'm hurting could feel, because they don't have the capacity for that yet. It's usually more immediate reward, immediate consequence. Well, consequence could be both a reward or something negative. Peer influence is magnified. So group dynamics can override individual judgment, especially in situations involving perceived hierarchy or social approval. We broke down this group dynamic because we thought that maybe you have a leader, which we thought could be the 10-year-old, maybe the girl. And we had a couple of reasons behind that. Maturity, the fact that she is a girl hanging out with them could present a very unique dynamic. But then we also have an escalator. So a leader, an escalator, and a follower. And we passed the judgment real quick to say that maybe the 8-year-old was the follower because they were the youngest. We made sense in our justifications, but nothing's ever 100%. We're just trying to piece it together, part of the profiling. And then we made the 9-year-old the escalator, and then the 10-year-old the leader, which I still think fits. But again, it's really a guess, but it's what people do when they profile. It's not really a guess. Actually, I shouldn't have said guess. It's more of a experienced evaluation, I would say, because you're leaning on something. And in our cases, we're just leaning on the experience of what we learned, and it doesn't mean it's 100%, but it's a starting point. Trauma and adverse childhood experiences can further impair development, creating cycles of aggression and dysregulation. I mean, there was a point when I talked to a mental health clinician, as I said, Denise Schoenwald. She said there's a point when a child's not worth saving because they can't. You still commit to the effort because that's what you're told to do, But sometimes success should be noted when you tell someone, hey, this child can't be released because you can't make me do the impossible. This doesn't excuse what happened to A. Marie, but it does mean that holding an 8-year-old accountable in the same way we hold a 25-year-old accountable is neurologically absurd. They're not miniature adults. They are children whose capacity for moral reasoning is still forming. I stayed focused on the 8-year-old because they were the youngest. When we were having the discussion, we had the 10-year-old on the line, and we were very shocked that they actually charged the 9-year-old. We weren't so shocked that they charged the 10-year-old, but we were shocked they charged the 9-year-old. But the 8-year-old we knew would be an impossibility. Conflicting laws. Okay, so the problem of minimum age. This is what my friend Eric was helping me out with. So he goes, one of the deepest tensions in juvenile justice is that the law is inconsistent. States vary widely on the minimum age at which a child can be prosecuted in juvenile court or transferred to adult court. So in the federal system, discretionary transfer to adult court generally requires minimum age of 15, though for certain violent crimes, it can be as low as 13. Guys, if you have any feedback on this ad, because we're learning as well. At the state level, the numbers swing dramatically. Some states allow transfers at 10, 12, or 13. And in rare cases, I noticed there was a children as young as 8 have been prosecuted as adults. But guys, that is extremely rare. But there was one that I saw. Half of U.S. states have no minimum age at all for juvenile jurisdiction. This is where philosophy collides with law. A rehabilitation purist would argue that anyone under 18 should remain in the juvenile system, no matter the crime. A punishment purist counters with the slogan, adult crimes, adult time. In reality, the best answer likely lies in between, balancing justice, accountability, public safety, rehabilitation, and science. Guys, I discussed this as well in the last episode, so some of this may sound repetitive, but it leads into this side of the dialogue. So again, I definitely think you also should check out the other video as well. And yet in A. Marie's case, we see the tension laid bare. At ages 8, 9, and 10, the suspects are legally too young to be transferred into adult court in Ohio, even though the crime is as brutal as anything one would see in an adult homicide indictment. I also saw an international case because a lot of everybody was sending my way James Bulger, and I watched a few videos on that. And that is a case that happened back in '93. If you guys haven't seen that case, that's a good case to kind of run parallels with this one. So the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child recommends a minimum age of criminal responsibility of at least 14. That's the age I was very familiar with before doing this one, for doing this video, because 14 was the age I was focused on, because that's what I kept on seeing coming up. But my friend did a little bit more deeper research, arguing that children below this threshold lack sufficient developmental maturity for criminal culpability. So now, when do parents bear the weight? So if the system cannot hold the children fully accountable, attention often shifts to the parents. And there is precedent. I saw 2 cases. One was in Michigan, Oxford High, 2021. James and Jennifer Crumbly were charged with involuntary manslaughter after the 15-year-old son carried out a school shooting because they ignored warning and failed to secure their guns. Other Ohio cases where parents have been prosecuted for contributing to the delinquency of a minor or child endangerment when children under their care committed serious crimes while unsupervised. So there is a question here. Where were the adults? What supervision, intervention, or support was lacking? And research shows that children who commit serious violence often come from environments marked by exposure to domestic violence, neglect or inconsistent caregiving, lack of mental health intervention despite warning signs, and community violence and trauma, amongst other things. Because if you look at the details of what these children did, including the sexual assault, we could make an assumption that somewhere in the house they were exposed to some level of that, whether it was to them seen or pornographic. And that made a lot of sense when the audience was saying, hey, check the families. Got to check the families, see what's going on in those homes, because the accountability is coming from what could have led to that, what could have given the child the mindset to do that at such a young age. And here's something we discussed on the show with the mental health counselor. And by the way, that was a dialogue that we were growing into. So there was a lot of questions that were very nuanced that we were trying to answer or try to provide a perspective to. Maybe that would be better, trying to provide a perspective. I think that because I don't know if there's really answers. I mean, sometimes things are so simple and we make it more complex. But sometimes there is complex. I mean, sometimes things are just so complex. But we mentioned that when there's damage to a child at that such young of an age, when they're trying to form their connection to people, form their connection to the world, that damage at an early age can be a strong anchor, and there will be no recovery because it's when it's forming. So that initial young age, that time when they're trying to form that initial empathy, if it gets damaged in any way to a point where they just don't develop it as most would, the foundation to build true empathy has no base. There's nothing to draw from. So they may be able to fake it along the way, but good, strong mental health counselors, people that will work with them, they're people that would be assigned to them, they could probably pull that out. And hopefully they get judged. The people that do these jobs get judged as successful when they don't just get somebody through something, but also note when they can't, because I think that is success as well. I mean, you put so much pressure that you got to change someone, but what about if you can't? And then you get people that are concerned, well, if I can't change them, oh my God, what happens to me? So they may just look for success where success isn't there. So adults and agencies responsible for children should be held accountable for their acts of omission. I put adults and agencies because a lot of it's also focused on child protective services too. That's been coming up in the comments. So again, all right. So wait, adults and agencies responsible for children should be held accountable for their acts of omission or commission that contributed to the serious crimes of children under their care. That doesn't always mean parents share criminal intent, but it does mean new or revised laws may be necessary to define accountability when children commit atrocities. I got to talk about race again because that's still coming up. I brought it up yesterday and just painting a picture of what criminal justice will look like for A. Marie, which is, again, there's a lot there to balance, but people need to remember the scale starts with what the victim and the victim family requires, and you shouldn't deviate from that. So we cannot ignore that cases like A. Marie are embodied in broader systems of inequality. So my friend did some research, and it consistently shows Black and brown children are disproportionately prosecuted as adults compared to white children who commit similar offenses. And now, again, this is just what he was able to look up and find. There could be many reasons why that statistic is high, but that is a statistic. Children from low-income communities face harsher consequences and have less access to mental health resources, family support programs, and legal advocacy. And then trauma exposure is higher in communities affected by systemic disinvestment, leading to higher rates of childhood aggression and violence. And it's good to know these statistics and be upfront and honest with it. There's no bias in me putting it out there. It just seems to be that's what the statistics say. And the reason why my friend also, he's the one that shared these thoughts with me, is because if you're going to go ahead and try to create a difference, you can't let political censorship get in the way of, basically being afraid to say something when it's the truth because you're afraid you're going to offend somebody. Hey, if we have trust and you know what I'm trying to do here, then just listen. I can't be so worried about offending somebody or apologizing for a statement that's true if that's where the change has to happen. I even found myself at the very beginning trying to make sure, hey, don't get offended by what I'm going to say. But in the end, if we're building trust, why should I have to say that? I think sometimes a lot of the change that should be happening that don't is because people are afraid to speak their mind. They're more afraid of offending someone than doing what's right. If there's trust, we're good. But also, I can't control how everybody interprets what is really good intent. One person tries to be objective and the other person subjectively interprets it in a way that they take it personal. It's like, hey, it wasn't meant to be personal, but we can't distract ourselves from how you feel about what was just said. At the end of the day, this is what makes the most sense, and this is where we have to move forward. Any discussion of justice in this case must grapple with these realities. Are we asking, how do we punish these 3 children? Are we asking, how did our system fail so completely that 3 children could commit such violence? Now, there may be some people that may not want to hear that question because in some way they think that minimizes accountability, but you can't say we got to go after the parents in one breath and then say those kids are 100% accountable. There's a conflict there. There's a conflict that speaks that, at some point there could be some influence at the home because of their age. So it's still a balance of both, but one is kind of tracking the origin and the other is really attacking a symptom. So let's just see where this begins, because would it be possible? And again, I'm just throwing it out there, not to minimize, but if we believe it starts at the home, how many of us would be willing to say, now this is hard, but when we're talking about justice, we're talking also about preventive measures, correct? We don't want this to happen to anybody else, which means that you got to get to the root of what's causing it. And you got to dig dirty and you got to accept things that you wouldn't normally accept if that's where the direction has to go. So if we keep on looking at the parents, is it possible that we also could look at the 10-year-old, the 9-year-old, and the 8-year-old as a victim at some level? Is that possible? Would we be open to that? Would that be where true change could occur on the prevention side? Does that mean that there's a lack of accountability? I don't think so. I think somewhere along the line, the accountability still exists. But once that can be established, where do you go now to prevent and help the child heal? Because there's still, I believe, two more components when it comes to what real justice will look like. It's funny because I noticed something. When you feel at one point that you're not getting the accountability you think you should get, and I say accountability, I don't say punishment, I say accountability, because people are afraid of the word punishment. But technically, what we mean by punishment is accountability. When you don't get it, and you're so desperate for an answer because you got to give justice to this little girl, you start fishing. If I can't hold the 3 children accountable, got to get the parents. That makes sense. Or you may even go and say, what about the family member supposed to be watching her? So we start to go into further extremes because we want answers. It doesn't mean we're bad for doing it. It's just we need something for some level of closure, because closure isn't even about the punishment side or the accountability side, even though it's a big part of it. It's not fully about that. We want A-Marie to heal. So how do you get information that can help her or make some level of a promise that this won't happen again? So sometimes when we're looking for the answers by asking some good questions, it's really what we're trying to do is to provide comfort to the person who needs it the most. So I want to talk about judicial discretion versus statutory handcuffs. So another conflict lies in how much discretion judges should have. Again, Eric, thank you for this. Juvenile courts are built on rehabilitation and flexibility, not strict sentencing grids. But in practice, too much discretion, risk outcomes swayed by emotion or media pressure, and too little discretion with mandatory waivers or automatic charges strip judges of the ability to account for age, trauma, or development. Because remember, there's no trial here, no jury for juveniles. For example, a Wisconsin 10-year-old was initially treated as an adult defendant in a homicide case because the law required it. Only later did a judge declare the child incompetent to stand trial. This tug of war reflects the pendulum of juvenile justice swinging between rehabilitation and retribution, depending on public pressure. So the challenge is, how do we design a system that treats each case individually while maintaining fairness and consistency? And I think that's what we're trying to push now. Exceptions, but that still fall within the boundaries of what's expected. So it's 2 words, I guess, would be exceptions and expectations. Because the exceptions still have to filter from what is required and protected by law. But a lot of this stuff is not written in stone. They're foundational, which means that you can work from things that's already put there as long as you stay true to what the expectation is of that law. And this brings us to the hardest truth. Victims' families often, so this is about justice versus retribution. So this brings us to the hardest truth. Victims' families often feel abandoned. In A. Marie's case, her mother has made clear that she wants accountability. Yet if the law sets the bar such that 8, 9, and 10-year-olds cannot face adult level punishment, then no matter how horrific the crime, the family may never feel justice in the traditional sense. And we explored this in the episode I did the other day. The term is retribution, and that term has fallen out of favor in many juvenile systems by families like A. Marie. But families like A. Marie's are not wrong to crave a sense of accountability and consequence, because I believe that also partners with the healing that will be needed for A. Marie and for her family. The question is how much, right? So if any, retributive justice can or should be delivered when the offenders are children whose brains are not fully formed. So there are alternative justice models, and thanks, Eric brought this in. So you do have restorative justice processes that involve offenders confronting the harm they cause, with victims having a voice in determining accountability measures. And that may be hard for this age group to do that. I've seen it happen, though, with older, and I think it is actually a good step forward. Especially if you feel that the person's actions were more pressured situationally, that somewhere along the line they may have committed a bad act, but doesn't mean they're a bad person. And they are truly empathetic, and they're doing it for the right reasons, not because there's a benefit to them, but rather I need to give them closure. I've seen that done with family members of victims who went and confronted the person who committed the atrocity to their family. And there's some level of healing for both sides, but it's a tough one, because the system really is designed to keep both parties away from each other, technically to protect both parties, because you got to figure this person caused a crime and he could be dangerous, but also people want retribution and they could take him out. So the effort to bring these parties together is a very unique model, but it does have its benefits. Because I think for me, that really does show the true power of change on all levels. Because at the end of the day, if a person that was affected directly by a crime can forgive someone, then what's that say about the community? You know, if the victim can forgive it, then why can't we? And you can't dummy it down by saying, well, that victim or the family, they must be stupid to forgive that. No, it's not. It's not as superficial or surface as you may think. That forgiveness is an effort to move forward, because you don't really want to live with hate in your heart. It will destroy you. And then if I could speak on the aggressor side, because I do work in a facility, in a prison, we do have to care for their well-being, and we do have people invested in their change, because prison system is a reformative system. So we do have people that are invested in the change, and there are people that work in the system that believe that people can change. And I do believe people can change, because I believe in the work that's done behind the wall. So we do introduce them to things, including a great program about focus on the victim, where you introduce the people who've committed the bad acts to victims of those types of crimes, and they get to see what it's like from the other perspective. And I truly believe that some of them don't know how what they've done makes other people feel. They could have a high sense of entitlement, but there are a lot of cases where things are situational. I'm not saying it provides an excuse, but in their mind, it provides them a justification in their world, in the way they live things. So once you can remove that justification and shift that mindset to the point where now the justification gets minimized to an excuse, you can start maybe having an effect on them. And again, I have to believe that change can happen, because that's what we do. That's our purpose. That's what drives us. So if I was to say that nobody can change, I mean, what am I in this business for? But that doesn't mean we can save people. That's not our job. So there is a balance there. I'm not here to save you, because at the end of the day, saving someone means I'm taking on 100% responsibility. No, I'm here to help you find what you need to help yourself. So again, I do like restorative justice. Then you have the intensive therapeutic interventions. So for young offenders that address trauma, teach empathy, and rebuild moral reasoning. And then you got the victim support systems that provide Amory's family with counseling, financial assistance, and community support independent of the criminal process. So these don't replace the need for consequences, but they acknowledge that punishment alone, especially of children, rarely heals anyone. And that is the perspective where we're going when it comes to justice. So again, I really like that the accountability or punishment. I like the accountability, the prevention. So the prevention is the rehabilitative side of justice. And then you have the healing, which if you partner that all together, there's benefits all around for everyone. And again, I explored that a little bit in the video I did yesterday. And I don't think the justice system has been defined at some level to that way. I just was looking at it from so many different subjective perspectives that I just really, everybody's going to have their own way to define criminal justice. And it's kind of pulling from all these either ors. And I said, well, maybe it's not an extreme. Why does it have to be one or the other? Why can't it be a blending of these three things? The accountability, which is again, if you want to put that as the punishment side, the prevention side, the rehabilitation for the reform, and then the healing. So in Ohio, children as young as 10 can be adjudicated delinquent in juvenile court. The 8-year-old case will be especially complex as they will fall below even the threshold. That's why they haven't been charged. The likely outcome could include detention in a juvenile facility until they reach adulthood or are deemed rehabilitated, intensive mental health treatment and trauma therapy, educational social programming designed to address the root cause of the violence, which definitely will involve families, because you never know. You got a negative family, all the good work that's being done, kids at home, it becomes a counter influence or a conflict. And then the possible transfer to adult court at age 18 if they remain dangerous and unrehabilitated through the varies. Though this may vary by state law, because they get charged as juvenile, they may just kind of deal with that sentence until they're 21, and then that's it. The reality is these children will likely spend years in the juvenile justice system. Whether that time rehabilitates them or further traumatizes them depends entirely on the quality of the programs they receive. So that is important, but they do believe at least a 10-year-old and a 9-year-old may be involved in the juvenile justice system. But mind you guys, juvenile justice system, for the people that are rehabilitation purists, that is what the juvenile justice system is about right now. It is about rehabilitation. And for those that are more about the accountability purists, those that want to lean towards accountability and punishment, that's also separation from family, a more controlled environment. So there is a level of accountability there when you lose that level of freedom. So you kind of balance both, and that should please both sides. Or if it doesn't, then one side, you're going to call them out on it. But I'm giving them programs. So what do you want? What else do you want me to do? So towards reform, what would a better system look like? So cases like Amory exposes conflicting values and legal gaps, right? So some states set the bar for adult transfer shockingly low. Others have no minimum age for juvenile jurisdiction. Everett gave me some of this. Parents are sometimes prosecuted, sometimes ignored, depending on political will. And judges are caught between science, child brain development, law, so statutes or on transfers and jurisdiction, and community outrage, calls for justice. And I get it, there's pressure. But you got to do what's right. And what's right really is never subjective. What's right has to be done by really looking at the evidence and taking in the bigger picture. Because at the end of the day, the justice system isn't the final piece. It's just a piece. You have to make sure when you put that piece in, it matches the puzzle you're building. And what are you trying to build? That's the greater question. Reform must be evidence-based. So we have seen what happens when panic drives lawmaking. I saw something in 1994 federal crime bill fueled by the super predator myth, created harsher punishments without improving safety, and decades later left behind bloated prisons and disillusioned communities. So what would a better system look like? Clear minimum age for juvenile prosecution, ideally 12 to 14, in line with international standards, which was the ages that I saw when I did my older videos a couple of days ago. Mandatory competency evaluations for very young offenders to determine that they understand the proceedings and if they can work with their lawyers. So that's what you'll see the 10-year-old and the 9-year-old doing right now. They're going to see if they're competent. Can they work with their legal team? Greater parental accountability standards when children commit serious violence due to neglect or lack of supervision. Specialized juvenile procedures for children under 12, not simply shoving an 8-year-old into a system built for a 17-year-old, and investment in prevention, early childhood mental health services, trauma-informed schools, family support programs, and community violence intervention. And then victim-centered justice models that provide support, voice, and healing to families like A-Marie, regardless of what happens to the offender. And then I got some questions I want to provide out to us, just from reflective questions. What does justice look like for A-Marie's family? And again, I did provide an answer, but if you want to comment on this, that's great. If the suspects are legally too young to face adult consequences, what would justice look like for you? Should parents face charges when their children commit extreme acts of violence? And if so, where is the line between neglect and shared guilt? And that's important, because neglect is not equivalent to shared guilt. And how do we define neglect? If retribution is impossible in cases like this, how can society provide victims' families with closure and dignity? What do we owe these 3 child offenders? Are they victims too of trauma, neglect, and failed systems, or does their crime erase any obligation to rehabilitate them? I had to ask that question because that's what's coming through the feed. And finally, are our laws designed to protect children or to protect communities? Can they do both at once? So the closing thought is A-Marie's case. Let's just get her picture up here. Let's move this. A-Marie's case is not just about 3 children in Cleveland. It's about the unfinished project of juvenile justice itself, a system caught between child development, public safety, law, and grief. So until we reconcile those conflicts, we risk leaving both victims and young offenders without true justice. We need a system that holds children accountable in developmentally appropriate ways, supports families devastated by violence, invests in prevention before tragedies occur, and has the moral courage to say some things. This is important, guys. Please pay attention to this thought. Some things are both true at once. That's complexity. That's where blending comes in. These children committed horrific acts, and these children are still children. And that's the best way I can balance the discussion that's coming my way. The hardest work is holding both truths without letting either one disappear. That's the key. As always, guys, the show is Tear Talk. If you like, please subscribe. Thank you guys for helping me build my community. I like to keep it going, try to make impact during these moments of such horrific tragedy. You know, when people are looking for bullshit headlines, we'll spend our time focusing on what matters. Why can't we take a moment like this and go beyond just providing information, be part of change? Don't need the next headline. Just let's go back and relook at this from a greater perspective, because there's something missing. And we as a community can be the piece to fit it in. Find it. All right, as always, guys, stay safe.